Donna Andrews is the author of the Agatha Anthony and Barry Award-winning Meg Langso series, a 12-piece set of books with number 13, The Real, is it Macaw? McCall. Real Macaw, coming this July. Today, we are honored to have her speak about her 12th book, Stork Raving Mad, which I might add is really cute and well-written story. She is also a New York Times best-selling author of Swan for the Money. Like Meg Langso, the ornamental blacksmith heroine of her series from the St. Martin's Press, Donna Andrews was born in Yorktown, Virginia, the setting of The Murder with Peacocks and Revenge of the Wrought Iron Flamingos, and now lives and works in Reston, Virginia. When not writing fiction, Andrews is a self-confessed nerd, rarely found away from her computer unless she's messing with her garden. Although she read widely as a child, especially in fantasy and science fiction, her love of mystery developed during her college years. Andrews attended the University of Virginia, majoring in English and drama with a concentration in writing. After graduation, she moved to the Washington, D.C. area and joined the communications staffs of a large financial organization, where for 2 decades she honed her writing skills on nonfiction and developed a profound understanding of the criminal mind through her observation of interdepartmental politics. She is the member of Sisters in Crime, the Chesapeake chapter, Mystery Writers of America, the Mid-Atlantic chapter, and the Private Investigators and Security Association. Please help me welcome Donna Andrews.
Hi there, and I should also mention, since 2 of my fellow volunteers are here, I'm a volunteer for Malice Domestic, the annual mystery convention that takes place in Bethesda every year. What I usually do when I do these talks, and someone asked me at the author's tent, do you say the same thing each time? And I said, if I try to, I couldn't. But what I usually do is tell a little bit about how I came to write the current book and give you a little preview of what's coming up in the next book. Since many of you might not have heard of me before, I will say that my books are a humorous mystery series. One often uses the invidious word cozy. I hate that word, but I wish we could find a better word, but that really does cover the block. That essentially means that any sex or violence happens off stage. Sorry about that. It's the sort of book you can give to your mother or your teenage daughter and not be embarrassed about what they're going to find. I started off by writing Murder with Peacocks, and since publishers like a title, you can identify my books in that series because they always have a bird in the title. Preferably a bad pun involving a bird, which is why my oeuvre also includes Murder with Puffins, Revenge of the Wrought Iron Flamingos, Crouching Buzzard, Leaping Loon. Then we got to the puns. We'll always have parrots, owls well that ends well, No Nest for the Wicked, The Penguin Who Knew Too Much, Cockatiels at 7, 6 Geese a-Slaying, Swan for the Money, and now Stork Raving Mad. I picked Stork for this book because in this book my heroine is 8.5 months pregnant with twins. And this book takes place during one very long day. Many women have told me that any day you're pregnant, much less pregnant with twins, is automatically a very long day. I've seen my sister-in-law, who's 5'2", pregnant with the boys, my nephews, who were 6 pounds, 7 ounces, and 7 pounds. She had some very long days. And I decided that twins would be a lot of fun to put in the books. One of the things that we mystery writers do is we kind of go around, and if we see something interesting, especially if you're in the company of other mystery writers like my friends Alan and Brad back there, something interesting happens, and we all look at each other and say, are you going to use that? Or can I? But if you get your own material and there's not another writer around, you've got dibs on it. Well, a friend who was going through his PhD process, which is a painful process, he was venting to me about the difficulty he was having with his comprehensive advisor, who basically sounded to me like she was trying to sabotage his entire degree. And he would vent to me, and at one point I said, well, I'll kill her for you if you like. And he looked at me, and you could tell he wasn't quite sure what I meant. I said, only on paper, of course. But it was very therapeutic for him, because this woman would do something else nasty, I would add another person in the book who's trying to kill my victim, who was very closely modeled on his invidious professor. It sort of began looking like Murder on the Orient Express, only they didn't play well with others. They were all trying individually. And I had to get a doctor and two doctors to help me sort out exactly who killed her and how you can tell which of them killed her. But it takes place in my fictitious town of Caerphilly, Virginia. I used to set them in Yorktown. About the third time someone said, "And which of the guys in the police department is your character Montgomery based on?" I decided I wanted my own town, that I could have my way with it. Caerphilly is very closely based on Yorktown as I remembered it when I was growing up, and UVA, and Charlottesville when I went to UVA. So there's a large college at which my heroine's significant other, now her husband, is a professor. And when I was at UVA, it was actually illegal to crawl through the steam tunnels, which meant that most of us thought it was a real hoot. But this made me aware of the fact that UVA, before the campus spread to its current dimensions, there was a single central heating plant for the entire campus. And one day when they sabotaged that plant, it was a cold day everywhere you went. In my book, the college heating plant is down, and everyone in town is taking in students. My heroine's significant other is in the drama department, so he's taking in all the drama students. They're having rehearsals in the barn. It's a lot of fun. I also decided that one of the things I did was that I decided to end the book. I will give you a spoiler. You do not find out the name of her twins in this book. Throughout the whole book, they refer to them. They've chosen not to know the gender. Throughout the book, they refer to them by like Bonnie and Clyde, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Thelma and Louise. Various famous pairs through history. And one of the reasons I did that, I thought it would be kind of fun to play with it. And the second reason is I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted her to have. And the third reason was that for those of you who are avid readers of the series, I am having a contest. If you guess, and there's still a couple days to do it because I haven't had time to tot up the entries. If you can guess what the twins are named, you can win a free copy of the next book, The Real Macaw. So Stork Raving Mad, I was really glad that my friend gave me the academic idea. And once I got onto the idea of having it be about someone who was having their dissertation, I began talking to other friends and realized that no one gets through a dissertation or survives as a faculty member without having numerous people they'd like me to kill. I actually had to draw straws. It's a process that's fraught with stress. And also, I always look for my books for something that has the possibility of homicide and humor. Where there's stress, there's also humor. Because the primary reason is, my books are not just mysteries, they're funny mysteries. And if I'm not making you laugh, I'm not doing half my job. And at the time I was starting to think, and normally I start, before you ask the question about craft, I do sort of outline. Normally what I really like to do is to get the entire plot worked out beforehand and have about a 20 or 30 page outline that details all the high points. These days, now that I'm writing a book every year, that doesn't always happen. As a matter of fact, I only have a vague idea whodunit in the book I'm currently working on now, but it will come. But I was getting an idea. This idea came to me for the book that I was about to start writing last year, which is now coming out in July under the name of The Real Macaw. I saw this vision of my heroine coming down from feeding her twins, gender unspecified. Oh, I've got to thank you. Gender unspecified, and finding her living room was full of animals. Cats, dogs, puppies, kittens, guinea pigs, hamsters, maybe a few turtles and lizards, and a foul-mouthed macaw. I liked this vision. I had no idea where it was going, but I liked it. So I tucked it away. I call it marinating it. I try to marinate my book ideas until eventually a plot emerges. Why are these animals in her living room? Well, it occurred to me, and I was reading a lot on the current economy, and it occurred to me that if her town was having financial problems, their county manager might change the animal shelter from a no-kill shelter to a kill shelter because it's awfully expensive to run a no-kill shelter. And this obviously would not fly with the animal-loving citizens of my fictitious town. But until they got it changed, they'd be very nervous that a few animals might perish under this new system. So her father and her grandfather, animal lovers both, decide they're going to burgle the animal shelter and steal all the animals and take them to new homes. So since her father's involved, and he's quite the mystery reader and likes drama. They have a midnight rendezvous at a graveyard with the guy who's got the big truck to take them to the other foster homes. The guy never shows up. There they are with several pickup trucks and vans full of animals, no place to put them. So they say, let's take them to Meg's house. She's got a barn. Great. Of course, the barn is locked because that's where she has her blacksmith shop with all its expensive equipment. So until they can figure out how to break into the barn, they've got the animals in the living room. And that was as far as I got. And to me, that was enough to know that I could write this book because the humor was going to be there of dealing with all these animals. But I needed a plot. I thought at first that I was just going to have the plot be around the guy who was driving the truck and got knocked off was a bit of a tomcat, and I thought the plot would revolve around all of his girlfriends and ex-girlfriends and their spouses and significant others, and I thought, okay, but I wasn't excited about that jealousy plot. And then I was doing a little web surfing on my iPhone. I'm an addict to this thing. It goes with me everywhere. But I'm fumble-fingered, so I can't always hit the things I want when I'm web surfing on the iPhone. And I was trying to look up something I needed to know for, like, going to dinner that evening, and I hit a link that went to a story about the town of Buena Vista, Virginia. I think they pronounce it Buena Vista, but my sister-in-law is Hispanic, and I can't quite bring myself to pronounce it that way, so bear with me if you're from Buena Vista. They built a town golf course. They thought it would be a revenue generator. They could pay for other civic activities with a golf course. So they borrowed some money and they built the golf course, and nobody came. They probably brought it online about the beginning of the recession, which was one reason. Unfortunately, you heard me mention just kind of in passing that they had borrowed money to pay for the golf course. Not only did they borrow money, but they mortgaged all their town buildings, their courthouse, their office building, and their jail. And at the time that I found this article, they had just decided they couldn't afford to pay the interest. And they were waiting to find out what the lender was going to do. Would the lender renegotiate the loan? That's usually what happens. Someone who has worked a lot in real estate in the last several years told me the lender might just kind of pretend they didn't notice they weren't paying in the hopes that eventually get flush again and start paying. But the lender could also repossess all the buildings. And I thought that's the sort of thing that would happen in my fictitious town. So in the real macaw, the town has borrowed a bunch of money for a civic beautification program that did not turn it into the tourist attraction they hoped. And the lender is about to repossess all the town buildings. So during the second half of the book, when the police chief would really like to be solving the murder, he's moving his police station to someone's barn. And I had a lot of fun with that. So sometimes I call it research by wandering around, either in person or the internet, or research by serendipity. There's nothing, I do a lot of research on the internet, but there's nothing like going and actually wandering through. For example, I wrote a book about that took place at a Revolutionary War reenactment. And I grew up in Yorktown, Virginia, which, for those of you who are history buffs, is where Lord Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington, although technically Lord Cornwallis pretended to be sick, so he didn't surrender to George Washington, he surrendered to George Washington's second in command, because Washington said if Cornwallis isn't coming in person, I'm not taking his sword. He could hand it to the underling. I know lots of little things about the Revolution. I thought it would be kind of fun to have a Revolutionary War reenactment at which you found a real body. And I spent a lot of time at reenactments talking to people and finding out how it worked. And you get these anecdotes, stuff that I could never make up, that people write your dialogue for you if you do this research by wandering around. For example, I came across this guy who was running a camp carpenter shop. And since my heroine is a blacksmith, it seemed like it might be kind of useful to research how a carpenter shop would work. And they were telling me about something this guy did. He did something that you weren't supposed to do. He lost his temper with the public. The reenactors love history, and they love educating the public gently about history. But this woman came up to the carpenter shop and said, "Well, this is anachronistic. They didn't have nails in those days. They just had wooden pegs. They put everything together with wooden pegs." And he was trying to explain that, ma'am, yes, they did have nails in the colonial era. Fine furniture was often put in. No, wooden pegs. That's all they had, wooden pegs. About the third or fourth time that she interrupted him to say that no, there were no nails in colonial times, only wooden pegs, he said, "Look, lady, How do you think they put Christ on the cross? With Scotch tape? You can't make that stuff up. I mean, you could if you're really good, but I prefer to do the research by wandering around. One of my books, No Nest for the Wicked, I was researching in Owl's Well That Ends Well. I was writing about a giant yard sale, and for some reason this created the overwhelming desire to do some decluttering in my house, which could really use it. So after I finished my day's quota, I'd go through and do some decluttering. I was working my way through a stack of Smithsonian magazines. Now, you can't just throw those away. There's good stuff in them, right? This is the clutterer's problem. So I'd sit down every evening and I'd read a Smithsonian magazine cover to cover, and then if there was anything I thought might be a research point, I'd put it in a file, and then I'd recycle it. I read an article about extreme croquet, and I thought, this is cool. This is it's kind of like croquet on an obstacle course. They play it in the winter in the snow in Connecticut. They play it in fields with, like, cows in it, and the oxen serve. You get it through the cow's legs, it's an extra wicket, extra point. But I needed to do the research, so I emailed these guys who play it up in Connecticut that either invented it or popularized it. I said, can I come and watch you play? And they said, no. We take no prisoners and we allow no spectators. You must play with us. So I did. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm sitting there, I can't even see the wicket. And I said, where's the wicket? It's behind that tree directly ahead of you. You can either kind of like, if you're really good, you might be able to ricochet off that stump, or you might just kind of like gently. It was playing on an obstacle course. And there's pollen here, I can tell. And after that trip, I kept in touch with them, and they wrote some of my dialogue for me. In the first chapter of the book, my heroine finds a body that looks as if it's been killed by something like maybe a croquet mallet. So they're all suspects, and all the mallets are collected by the forensic people, along with the ball, which was found right next to the body. And when they resume the tournament they're playing, because they're playing an extreme croquet tournament, not just a game, how do they start up again? So I asked the guys. The ball was taken off the field by the forensic people and taken to the crime lab in Richmond. So what do you do when you start up again? And the majority opinion was that you just figure out approximately where the police left the field and toss it on the field at approximately that point. There was a strong minority that felt that I should put it in play from the crime lab in Richmond. An hour away. You know, he wrote my dialogue for me. I like writing about what I refer to as cults. And I don't mean religious cults. Any occupation, hobby, passion that is completely absorbing to the people who are doing it and looks a little strange to the people on the outside, like Revolutionary War reenacting or extreme croquet, like yard sailing, which is a consuming hobby, bird watching, the theater, a wedding, even in my first book. I mean, a wedding, my first book takes place around several of them. It's like a small cult with the bride as the high priestess, the maid of honor as her chief acolyte, and all the wedding party are the devotees. Some of them like good Catholics going to Mass whether they want to or not. So I look for a cult. One of the things I discovered in Swan for the Money, I read a book called Otherwise Normal People. If you like narrative nonfiction, it's a wonderful, funny book. This woman spent a year following competitive rose growers around. And the minute I started reading this book, I said, I've got to do that. My characters should do this. So I had my characters grow and show roses. And I knew that I wanted the roses. And then I did my research by wandering around. So I was looking for what do I throw in there for the crime. And a bookseller, many of you may have heard of Mystery Loves Company, which is a bookstore on the Eastern Shore. I was over there visiting them, and Kathy Herrig took me to a field and said, look. And I said, yes, Kathy, I've seen belted Galloway cows before. Those are the cows that kind of look like walking Oreos. They're black with a white stripe around the middle. She said, no, look closely. And I looked, and I said, those aren't calves. This is the wrong time of year. She said, no, they've acquired matching goats. There were goats that were black with a white strap around the middle in the field with the white, black, and they're yuppie cows. They're meat goats and meat cows, but they seldom get eaten because they're so decorative. So Kathy said, you must use these in a book one of these days. And I thought, okay, maybe. And then it became much more interesting to use them in the boat when Kathy emailed me. And she talked to the owner and said, these aren't just any old goats. They're belted Tennessee fainting goats. They kill, and this was starting to be good to me because it's the sort of thing that could happen in my novel. And then I had lunch with a goat herd. You're always doing research. It actually was a woman that I knew who worked in an office, but in her she had raised goats for many years, and she taught me 3 things about goats that the goats love to eat. Their favorite foods in the whole world. One is paper. If you see them gnawing on an old tin can, it's not the can, it's the glue. It's like mustard on the hot dog to the goat. They love the glue on the paper. The second thing is poison ivy. Should you ever own a goat, never kiss it on the lips, because the oil doesn't bother them, but it will really bother you. And the third thing that goats really love to eat is roses, thorns and all. And I realized I had my book. So that's kind of how I work. At the moment, I'm hoping that my public editor will get back to me and tell me that he likes the title, Some Like It Hawk. Yeah, that's the reaction I'm looking for, the groan when I tell the bad pun. There will be a hawk in the book. He may not be the killer. I don't think so. But, and when the train goes by, if we have time, I will take a few questions if anyone has any. It's a long train. We'll take questions during the train if you like. It's the freight train. So, any questions? Yes? Yeah, why did I choose blacksmithing for Meg, and do I do any art aside from writing? I deliberately chose blacksmithing. I was not one of those people who wrote a book and suddenly was surprised to find they wanted a sequel. I planned to have a series. And so when I started planning my series, I wanted to put in a lot of elements that I knew I could have fun with later. I liked the idea of having my heroine be a craft person, because at the time I started writing the first book, I was working in an office, sitting at a computer, 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, writing nonfiction or corporate fiction, depending on your point of view. And I realized it was a somewhat constrained life. They tended to mind if I didn't show up at 8 or 9, depending on, and if I was off sleuthing something, it would be an impediment. So I wanted her to have a more free and also perhaps a more perilous life. I made her a blacksmith because I love wrought iron and because I wanted it was a non-traditional craft for women. You see a lot of women potters and a lot of women weavers, but not a lot of women blacksmiths. And I thought, I want her to be an untypical. I also wanted to make her the action heroine. I wanted to be at the end of a book when you have a confrontation between the forces of good and evil, usually toe-to-toe between my heroine and the bad guy. I wanted her to be able to rescue herself. I did not want her to be one of those fainting heroines, always have to have the guy show up to rescue her. I even managed to wangle it so that in We'll Always Have Parrots, which takes place at a convention for a bad TV show, it's a fantasy TV show, and she's making swords and selling swords. I wanted to wrangle a way to have her have a sword fight with the villain at the end of the show, of the book. And by having a book in which almost everyone walking around that convention at least thinks he or she is a swordsman because they're in reenactment and stuff, I did. And I wanted her to be able to be plausible in that sword fight. So it was having her have a perilous, unpredictable income source, a job that she could take off with whenever she did, and a job that would make it clear that she was not a fainting violet. Arts. I have occasionally dabbled in the arts. I did quilting for a while. I'm not a blacksmith, although I keep wanting to take classes, and I keep finding out that classes take place during the times when I seem to be on deadline. So one of these years I'll manage to arrange it. But I do a lot of photography. I'm doing what's called the 365 project. Anyone who friends me on Facebook, one of the most common things you see me put out there are not words, but a link to my latest picture. The 365 project is a project where you take and post one photo every day for a year. So it's kind of like a diary of your life, or maybe an ongoing creative challenge to take yet another photo that's a little different from last week's. And I love taking the pictures because it's something that feels creative, and yet it's completely nonverbal. So as I'm out there running around with my camera, I'm big on the whole marinating. I'm having trouble with the scene. Let's go out and take some pictures. I paparazzi the yard. And by the time I finish taking pictures, sometimes I go back in, I realize my brain solved the plot problem while I was doing something totally nonverbal. I'd like to think that playing Civilization on my computer in the evenings has the same effect, but I haven't documented it as well. So, over there. Yes. Do I wake up in the middle of the night and have an idea that I have to write, and how long does it take me? I actually don't wake up in the middle of the night. I'm usually up anyway. I never understood. I mean, I know a lot of people who, especially if they wrote their first book while they had a day job, they talk about how virtuous it was that they get up. They get up 2 hours before they have to get up and write for 2 hours before they go to their job. And if it took that, trust me, I'd never have gotten a book written. I stay up 2 hours later than I ought to after I get home from my job. And it's the same lack of sleep, and yet for some reason it feels virtuous to get up early and decadent to stay up late. Sometimes I get up and I have to write, but more often the ideas will come to me when I'm completely unable to get to a computer. I believe in sitting down and writing whether you feel like it or not. I write a certain number of words a day, and if I can just zip them off like that, sometimes I'm finished in an hour. And if it's not working well, sometimes I'm still there at 2 a.m. trying to finish today's quota. But I find things where you cannot get to the computer, like wandering around far from your desk with your camera or driving. I work on dialogue when I'm driving. Any of you who see me driving along and I'm going, I'm not yelling at you or the traffic. I'm working on a dramatic scene. That's my story. But I'm not so much writing when I am inspired. There might be times when I say, oh, I should get that down before I lose it. But often I mutter until it's kind of fixed in my brain. And what was the other question? It pretty much takes me the whole year that I have, although I'm not writing draft. I usually work on planning. It may not be a formal outline, but I have some idea of what I'm doing and where I'm going before I start. And then at a certain point, I look and say, eek, I should have started a month ago. And then I do a spreadsheet of how many days I have between now and when I want to finish the draft, which with any luck will be like about 2 months before I have to turn it into my editor, because rotten books are written, good books are rewritten, really great books are rewritten 17, 18 times. So I figure out, okay, I've got, say, 90 days from now to the end of August. It's like May, June, July, okay, end of July. If I write 1,000 words a day for 90 days, I'll have 90,000 words. Great. And then I can edit them. I might only be working for 3 or 4 months on the draft, but there's all that marinating and planning and outlining and brainstorming beforehand, and then there's a lot of polishing afterwards. It was pretty all-consuming at the time when I was also working on my other series, now paused, not ended. And I didn't really... Someone said, how can you possibly do 2 series at one time? Don't you have trouble focusing? I actually thought it was great to be able to switch gears. The 2 series were different enough in tone. The other series featuring an artificial intelligence called the Turing Hopper series, that was a little darker than my Meg books, and it was really great to write something that was from a different point of view, from a different character, in a darker tone, and then go... Sometimes I'd procrastinate from one book by writing on the other, and that's between the time that I finished my draft of the first book and turned it into the contest that Minotaur runs that I won, and the time that I found out I'd won, you're tempted to sit there saying, did I win? Am I going to get published? And I was, while making a list of agents so that if I didn't win, I would be ahead of the game and ready to start submitting, I also sublimated all the tension by writing the first drafts of 2 other completely different books. So it takes the whole year, but it doesn't take the whole year full time, but it takes that long to kind of process the ideas until they get ripe and then get them on paper and polish them. That's sort of... It's an iterative process. Yeah. I don't have a day job anymore. I have, since quitting my day job in 2001, I have become, I'm told I have difficulty with the word no. So I work for MWA, I work for Sisters in Crime, I work for Malice. I am the doting aunt to my 7-year-old nephews and pick them up once or twice a week from school and amuse them. I quit the day job in 2001 when I got the second book, and really, it's not so much that the writing isn't a full-time job, it is, but when you add on all the volunteer work that you do around the mystery community and the whole promoting and selling your book, it's like 2 full-time jobs. So I'm really glad that I was able to quit my day job. And I am glorying in the shortest commute I've ever had in my life. I go downstairs. If I could build a trap door in the bedroom floor, it would whoop, I'm here. But yeah, so I am, however, rare. There are 3 kinds of writers who do not have a day job. There are writers who are retired from working many, many years at a day job and have a pension, like, military or civil service. There are writers who are married to someone who has a day job and with benefits, like insurance, and therefore they're not going to starve, or if they have appendicitis, it's not going to be a disaster. And then there are writers who are very, very nervous, go without health insurance, and utter things like, well, the royalty check wasn't as big as usual, so I guess I'll just try to get through this Washington summer without my air conditioning again. I kind of bootstrapped myself into class 1 by working for 20 years for a large company and saving my money diligently against the day when I could quit. So it's tough. Very few people make a living at it. And even if you make a living, is it the living you want to live on? So, any other questions? Yes? Yeah, the blog kind of, I'm working on becoming a reformed character. I do blog more often at the Femme Fatale. Yeah, and some of my blogging. Yeah, the blogging just kind of took, last year was a difficult year for me because I got my mom safely through breast cancer. She's great. But anyone who's ever had a serious illness in the family knows about how many medical visits that took to get her through there. And it was also the year when my sister-in-law was finishing her internship in clinical psychology and not getting paid for one of the most demanding scheduled jobs that she'd had. And I became much more of last year was family year, and I'm trying to get back on my feet and do more blogging, more Facebooking, because publishers seem to want you to do it. And I am on Facebook, and the thing, because Facebook has a word limit. Sometimes it's like, I could spend 2 hours getting up a blog, or I could just post that on Facebook really short and blog about it later. So, but yeah, it's one of the things you have no idea whether it's selling any books, but it is, social networking is becoming more and more important. So yeah. I'm not planning on a formal blog tour for my next book because I'm not sure people pay much attention to a blog tour. But around about July, you'll see me stepping out and trying to get a little more active because the next book comes out July 19th or so, The Real Macaw. And so I'll be trying to make myself a little more visible. We'll hope. Any other questions? Yes? Well, in a general sense, how many characters in my book are based on Meg's family, are based on my family? In a general way, the whole premise of having the vast family that's how I perceived my mother's family when I was little and growing up in Yorktown. And it was really unusual to meet anyone who hadn't either gone to school with my mother or was related to her, distantly, perhaps. After 20 years, she and her best friend finally figured out that they were distantly related. They had to work on it for 20 years. It's a small town. There are only 3 characters that are specifically based, that I will admit to, on individual characters. Meg's father is based on my father. Meg's father is a doctor. My father was a marine biologist. Meg's father loves mysteries. My father loved French literature and culture. Meg's father is short, round, and balding. My father was tall, skinny until Mom's cooking finally caught up with him in his 60s and had a full head of curly hair. Absolutely no... I tried to make him as different as possible. All his family recognized him anyway. Because this passionate enthusiasm that Meg Dads feels for whatever's going on at the time was Dad. There's the anecdote that some of you may have heard me tell about Dad became very enamored of a biography of the writer André Maurois, wrote of Georges Sand, the French writer. And he began reading other books about her, and that was when Impromptu, the movie about Georges Sand and Chopin, came out. And I read the book because we're a family of readers aloud, and I wanted to be able to say, yeah, Dad, I know, you don't have to read it to me. I read the book, remember? He did anyway sometimes, but it cut down on the amount of times I heard. And it was a good book. And at the dinner table one day, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary conversation about I'm not sure what, Dad said, so, speaking of Georges Sand, which, trust me, nobody had been, but that was typically Dad. Spike is based on a real dog, now deceased. He lives on. His owners really did call him the small evil one. I have in my files proof in the form of a 3-page typed set of instructions for what to do. This is late in his life when he had many medical problems as well as behavior ones. And Duck, the duck, was based on a duck I knew in childhood. Cutting me off? Yes, okay. Thank you. I will be signing in the...